Chapter 1. The Favorite. Vivian always made an entrance, even to her own dining room. Thanksgiving at her house was a tradition wrapped in control. Place cards, matching napkin rings, a color-coordinated cheese board. She floated through the kitchen with the ease of someone who had practiced her gracious host routine for years. Sloane Whitaker stood just inside the doorway, brushing snow from her coat sleeves as Vivian greeted the cousins like a queen bestowing warmth. "Tyler, oh my God, look at your hair. You're giving art professor. And, Melissa, did you bring that kale thing again? You have to show me your recipe." She beamed, glistened even. She always sparkled this time of year, polished to perfection. Then came Elaine. Sloane's mother stepped in quietly behind her, her coat still buttoned, cheeks pink from the cold. Vivian's smile cooled by 2 degrees. "Elaine," she said, crisp and restrained. "You made it." "We were invited," Elaine replied, offering a polite nod. "Of course," Vivian said quickly, already turning to adjust the centerpiece. No one noticed the tension. They never did. To the rest of the family, Vivian was the glue, the eldest sister, the caretaker, the one who'd held it all together after their mother passed. Elaine? She was the soft-spoken one, the woman people forgot to ask about, the one they let fade in and out of rooms without much fanfare. Sloane watched it all in real time, the uneven greetings. The weight her mother carried like it was made of dust, invisible but never weightless. She stayed close to her mom that evening, quietly intercepting small indignities, a subtle eye roll when Elaine asked about the pie, a quick pivot from Vivian when someone tried to bring up old family photos. No one said it out loud, but the divide was real, and Sloane had learned, over time, how to observe without drawing fire. She poured herself a glass of cider and took in the whole room. Cousins catching up, toddlers weaving through chair legs, Vivian leading a toast like she was being filmed. Sloane didn't say a word, but she felt it already. This year was going to break something open. Chapter 2. The Whisper. It happened just before dessert, the stretch of time when stomachs are full, wine glasses low, and people start to get comfortable saying things they shouldn't. Sloane had stepped away from the dining room under the guise of looking for the bathroom, but really, she just needed to breathe. The noise, the orchestrated perfection of Vivian's home, the way her mother's voice seemed to vanish the moment it entered a room, it all scraped something inside her. She was rounding the corner by the side hallway when she heard it. "I thought your mom was the one who ruined the will." It was Nate, Vivian's son, 30, smug and slightly tipsy. He stood half-turned toward Elise, one of the younger cousins home from college. Sloane froze mid-step, body shielded by the wall. Elise looked confused. "Elaine? I thought she gave up her share of Grandma's estate." "That's not what my mom says," Nate replied, lowering his voice like it made him sound wiser. "She said Grandma left the house to her, but Elaine tried to block it. Like, she didn't want Vivian to have anything. Took it to a lawyer. Almost tore the whole family apart." Sloane's stomach turned. He said it so casually, so convincingly, like it was fact, like it had always been fact. She stepped back slowly, careful not to be seen, and returned to the dining room, to the curated glow of candles and smiling faces and Vivian beaming over her pecan pie like it was handcrafted gold. Elaine was helping clear plates, nodding politely as someone complimented the stuffing. She didn't know. Not yet, but Sloane did, and it burned. Because she remembered the real story. She remembered the night the will came through. Vivian had taken control of the process immediately, calling the lawyer, handling the paperwork, telling everyone not to worry about the details. Sloane had been there when her mom quietly asked for a copy of the terms. Vivian had said it would just make things messy, that they shouldn't let documents ruin a family. Elaine hadn't pushed. She'd nodded. She always did. But that night, Sloane had heard her crying behind the bathroom door. I just didn't want to fight her. I didn't want to be that kind of sister. Now here they were, and Vivian had taken that silence and twisted it into a story where she was the victim, the saint, the sister who saved the family from a legal mess. Sloane sat back down at the table, and watched her mother place a slice of pumpkin pie in front of Vivian with a small smile. She wondered how many years of kindness had been used against her. The room buzzed around them, full of clinking forks and praise for a woman who had quietly rewritten the family's legacy while no one paid attention. But Sloane was paying attention now, and Vivian wasn't going to like what that meant. Chapter 3: The Visit. Months earlier, long before anyone carved a turkey or poured a glass of Vivian's holiday wine. It had been a Sunday when Sloane stopped by. Late spring, bright skies, open windows, and the kind of breeze that made you think everything was okay. Her mother's house smelled like lemon polish and lavender, like always. Comforting, familiar. But Elaine wasn't herself. She was sitting at the kitchen table in a thin sweater, hands folded on top of a sealed manila envelope. The expression on her face was one Sloane didn't see often, distracted, like someone half listening to a conversation only they could hear. "I brought cupcakes," Sloane said lightly, holding up the bakery box. "They were leftovers from Elise's engagement party. I know you said you didn't want to take any, but I ignored that." Elaine didn't smile. Not right away. "That was sweet of you," she said finally, her voice low. She gestured to the envelope. "I was just going through some things." Sloane glanced at the envelope. It wasn't just things. It was legal paper. Thick, stamped. The kind that made your stomach tighten even when it wasn't yours. "What kind of things?" Sloane asked, gently. Elaine shifted. Vivian sent over some final documentation from the estate. Just lingering details. Sloane took a seat across from her. "From Grandma's will?" Elaine gave a too tight smile. "Nothing you need to worry about." That phrase again. The soft deflection. The one Vivian had trained the whole family to use. "I'm not worried," Sloane said. "I'm here." Elaine's hand twitched slightly on the envelope. "She's trying to keep things smooth. You know how Vivian is. She always thinks she's doing the right thing." "Is she?" Silence. Elaine finally looked at her. Really looked. She was just better at stepping forward. "After everything, I never wanted a fight. Your grandmother hated fighting. But you didn't get anything," Sloane said carefully. "Not the house, not even the jewelry box Grandma promised you." Elaine exhaled, long and steady. "I didn't ask." Sloane sat back. "Did you not ask because you didn't want to, or because Vivian made you feel like you couldn't?" Her mother blinked, lips parted. No answer, and that was answer enough. Later, when Elaine stepped away to fold laundry, Sloane wandered into the hall cabinet and opened the drawer she remembered from childhood. Still there. A weathered blue binder labeled Estate Planning, Whitaker House, tab markers fraying at the edges. Tucked inside, pages dated years ago, notes in Grandma's handwriting, emails printed and highlighted. Some were missing chunks, photocopies of copies. But something else caught her eye. A post-it stuck inside the front cover. Faded ink, nearly invisible. "Ask Elaine, final letter. Do not leave with Vivian." Sloane closed the binder slowly. Her stomach coiled with the kind of knowing that doesn't come all at once, but in layers. Elaine hadn't been erased. She'd been removed. Quietly, surgically. And Sloane was just beginning to see the outline of the truth, and the woman who had carved it out of the story. Chapter 4: The File. That spring afternoon stayed with Sloane. She returned the next afternoon, claiming she'd left her sunglasses. Elaine had smiled and waved her in from the garden, apron dusted with soil. By the time her mother's footsteps had faded down the back steps, Sloane was already at the cabinet. The binder was exactly where she left it. This time, she opened it with purpose. She flipped past the summary of the will, past the legalese about property rights and asset transfers. Some pages had been removed. She could see the impressions where staples used to be. But what remained was more than enough. One section was labeled Final Allocations, Whitaker Estate. There, in firm, careful handwriting, was a list of items their grandmother had intended to leave. A house to both daughters, jointly. Jewelry divided by memory, not value. The cedar chest, Elaine's. The art, Vivian's. A handwritten note accompanied it, scanned and barely legible. It read, "Vivian, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Elaine deserves to be heard. She was there too." Sloane's jaw tightened. It contradicted everything Vivian had said. About Grandma insisting the house go to her alone, about Elaine opting out for peace. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a cover-up. Sloane took photos of the documents, every page, every signature, every note in the margin. Then she checked the front pocket of the binder and found something else, a printed email chain between Vivian and the estate lawyer. Most of it was uneventful. Logistics, deadlines, but one reply from Vivian stood out. If my sister becomes difficult about this, I'm prepared to take a firmer tone. The family doesn't need drama. I'll speak for both of us. Sloane reread the line 3 times. Speak for both of us. That was Vivian in a sentence. Control dressed as concern. Sloane folded the email and slid it into her coat pocket. Then she gently returned the binder, closed the drawer, and walked outside like nothing had shifted. But everything had. Because now she wasn't just angry on her mother's behalf. She was ready. Chapter 5. The Conversation. In the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, Sloane couldn't let it go. She kept thinking about the folder, the handwriting, the post-it from her grandmother tucked into the binder. Ask Elaine final letter. Do not leave with Vivian. It wouldn't stop echoing. So she went back. It was a quiet Tuesday evening, the kind where the day felt like it had exhaled. Elaine was folding laundry in the den, perfectly, methodically, as if symmetry could solve grief. Sloane curled into the armchair nearby, pretending to scroll her phone. I wasn't looking for it, she said finally. Not at first. Elaine didn't stop folding, but her hands slowed. Looking for what? The estate binder. That made her pause. The towels drooped slightly in her hands. I found it, Sloane continued, with Grandma's final notes. The house was meant for both of you. Elaine sat back on the couch, her fingers knotting lightly in the fabric. I didn't want to dredge all that up again. It was years ago. Sloane looked over. But you didn't contest the will. You didn't fight for anything. You just let it go. Elaine didn't answer. She stared at the coffee table. I've been hearing things, Mom. Quiet things. Around the family. The story Vivian tells. It's not the one I read in those papers. She makes it sound like you were the problem. Like you created drama and she cleaned it up. Elaine gave a small, tired breath. It was easier. For everyone. For everyone but you. Her mother didn't argue. Sloane sat forward, elbows on knees. You were there for Grandma when she got sick. You handled the calls, the meals, the hospice paperwork, and Vivian got the house, the credit, the narrative. Elaine gave a brittle laugh. Vivian's always been better at managing the version people hear. But it's a lie, Sloane said, and you let her keep telling it. Elaine looked over at her, finally. Her eyes were damp but steady. What do you want me to do? She asked. Rage? Storm into Thanksgiving and demand credit? No, Sloane said. But I want you to stop letting her erase you. Elaine was quiet. Then, and if no one believes me? Sloane smiled, slow and sure. They don't have to. They just have to hear you. Once. Chapter 6. The Silence. By the time dessert was served, Sloane could feel the familiar tension settle across the table like fog. It didn't come from shouting or conflict. It came from what wasn't said, from who wasn't acknowledged. Vivian glided back into the dining room, holding the last pie, pear and almond, plated like it belonged in a magazine. She set it down with a flourish. Well, she said, clasping her hands together, once again, I've pulled it off. A few cousins chuckled politely. No kitchen fires, no burnt rolls, and only one minor meltdown over the whipped cream. Wasn't that your meltdown? One cousin teased. Vivian winked. I prefer the term spirited disagreement with dairy. The room laughed. Sloane smiled too, but it didn't reach her eyes. Elaine was seated near the far end of the table, quietly passing a stack of dessert forks. No one looked her way. No one commented on the cranberry compote she had made from scratch, the same one Grandma used to serve. Vivian, you really did such a beautiful job, Aunt Carol said from across the table. I honestly don't know how you kept it all together after your mom passed. Vivian sighed, humble, practiced. Oh, I just did what needed to be done. Someone had to step up, right? Elaine reached for her water. Her hand trembled slightly. Vivian continued, folding a linen napkin beside her plate. Not everyone was ready to deal with things back then. Some people handled it by stepping back. But that's okay. We all grieve differently. Sloane froze. There it was, polished, controlled. Another dig, wrapped in sweetness. Elaine's fork slowed against her plate. But she didn't look up. Sloane leaned toward her mother. "Did you hear that?" "I heard it," Elaine said softly, still facing forward. "You're just going to let her say that?" Elaine paused, then looked at her daughter. "What would you have me say, Sloane?" "That it's not true," Sloane whispered back. "That she didn't step up. She shoved ye out." Elaine gave a small, weary smile. "Vivian has always been good at setting the scene. That doesn't make it real." Vivian raised her glass. "To grace under pressure," she said, smiling across the table. "And to the people who show up, even when it's hard." A few more clinks of cutlery. A fork tapping a glass. An uncle mumbled something about resilience. Sloane clenched her jaw. Elaine reached for her slice of pie and cut it neatly, her voice barely audible. "Let her talk. She needs it more than I do." "No," Sloane said quietly. "She needs to be seen for what she is." Her mother looked at her. Really looked at her. And something shifted behind her eyes. The quiet wasn't resignation this time, it was steel. "I won't stop you," Elaine said. "But if you're going to do something, do it with intention." Sloane nodded once, because she already had. Chapter 7. The flash drive. The voicemail was buried in an old archive folder, labeled Voice BKP 2021. Sloane hadn't meant to find it. She'd been looking for an old tax document when the file caught her eye. Vivian_HC09 APR. 58 seconds, sent at 11:42 p.m., nearly 2 years ago. Vivian's voice came through with the rawness of someone who thought they were talking to a confidant or an accomplice. "Harriet, I know you think I'm being harsh, but you saw it. Elaine was drowning. She didn't know what to do with Mom. She was over there every day, yes, but she couldn't make a decision to save her life. I stepped in when it mattered." Sloane paused. Harriet? Harriet Crane, her mother's longtime friend, the secondary executor on Grandma's estate. Vivian had always acted like Harriet was neutral, but this didn't sound neutral. "And the thing with the will," Vivian continued, voice quieter, but tight. "I didn't forge anything. I just clarified, tidied. You said it yourself. Mom would have wanted me to take the lead. So I made it official." Elaine never read the last version. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded and stayed quiet. "So don't act like I stole anything. I preserved the family's image. She was too fragile. I was strategic. The last few seconds were almost worse. She did the heavy lifting, sure, but if people knew that, they'd sympathize with her. And I've spent years building this legacy. I wasn't going to let her rewrite it with casseroles and good intentions." Click. Sloane stared at the audio waveform pulsing on her screen. Her pulse beat hard in her neck. This wasn't just cruel. This was calculated. She replayed the section about the will. "I didn't forge anything. I just clarified." But clarifying wasn't legal. Clarifying wasn't ethical. Clarifying could mean anything, especially with someone like Vivian. That night, she clipped the voicemail into a clean 28-second highlight. Harriet's name, the will confession, the admission about Elaine's caregiving, and the closing line. I wasn't going to let her rewrite it with casseroles and good intentions. She saved the file under a new name. Vivian admits, Harriet full. MP3. Then she loaded it onto a sleek black flash drive and slid it into a small padded envelope. On the label, she wrote, "Thanksgiving, just in case." She didn't tell her mom. Not yet, but she tucked the drive into her coat pocket, where it rested like a matchbook. Quiet, unlit, ready. Chapter 8. The Backup. Sloane didn't sleep much that night. Vivian's voice lived in her head, smug, venomous, full of half-truths and quiet confessions. She'd known her aunt was manipulative, but this was something else. This was theft, dressed as legacy. Treachery passed off as tradition. By sunrise, Sloane was already at her laptop. She started with public probate records. It took 2 hours, one paid fee, and a request form, but by mid-morning she had a PDF copy of the final. Notarized version of Grandma Whitaker's will, the one submitted to the court. Her stomach dropped as she read it. Vivian was listed as sole beneficiary of the house. Elaine was left personal items of sentimental value. There was no mention of joint ownership, no notes, no codicils. The handwriting was digitized, but Sloane had seen enough of her grandmother's script to know this version didn't match. There was no letter, no mention of the binder notes, just one signature. Clean, identical across every page, too identical. She printed it out and stared at the header. Last Will and Testament, Miriam L. Whitaker, revised, dated 2 weeks before Grandma was moved into hospice. Elaine had been there every day during that time. Vivian had been on a yoga retreat in Scottsdale. Sloane reached out to a former classmate, now a second-year associate at a family law firm downtown. She didn't say much, just explained that she was helping her mother sort out some lingering estate confusion. Off the record, she said, but can I ask, what happens if someone submits a will that doesn't match what the decedent originally stated? Not forged exactly, but maybe manipulated. Her classmate didn't ask questions, just answered quietly. If there's a prior version or a credible record that something was altered without full consent, especially if the person was already under care, it's grounds for challenge, especially if the beneficiary had sole control of the submission process. So if someone clarified a will? Sloane asked. He snorted. That's not a legal term. That's spin. She thanked him and ended the call. Then she made a folder. Inside, she placed the audio clip, the printout of the final will, a copy of Grandma's original handwritten notes, scanned from the binder, the printed email chain between Vivian and the estate lawyer, and a photo of a post-it written in her grandmother's unmistakable cursive. Ask Elaine, re-final letter. Do not leave with Vivian. She labeled the folder, Whitaker Estate Unredacted. It wasn't for the court. Not yet. But it was for the room, because the only thing louder than Vivian's voice was proof. Chapter 9, The Trigger. The table was full, but the room felt hollow. Empty plates clinked as dishes were cleared, and someone cracked a tired joke about calories and gym memberships. People laughed, too loud, too long, the way families do when they're trying to stretch warmth out of discomfort. Vivian stood up slowly, glass in hand, and smiled like she was preparing for a press conference. I just want to say a few words, she said, tapping her fork against her wineglass. If you'll humor me. The chatter softened. A few people raised their phones to record, just in case she got emotional. Vivian placed her free hand on her chest. Family has always meant everything to me, and it hasn't always been easy, especially after Mom passed. Sloane felt her stomach tighten. She glanced at Elaine. Her mother's expression was unreadable. Vivian continued, losing her left a vacuum, not just in our hearts, but in the structure of how things were handled, the responsibilities, the expectations, the chaos. A few nods, quiet agreement, and someone had to hold it together. She smiled modestly. Someone had to make the hard calls, to file the papers, to navigate grief and legalities while others— She paused, just a heartbeat too long, needed time to process. Sloane's jaw clenched. She would have been proud, I think, Vivian went on, that we made it through, that some of us kept things moving forward, even when it hurt. Some of us, Uncle Dennis repeated softly, raising his glass. Sloane felt a pulse of anger under her ribs. Vivian's voice dropped into that sweet, insufferable tone she used when she wanted to sound humble while making herself the hero. And I understand that grief looks different for everyone. Some people need space, others take action. A pause. And in the end, we forgive, don't we? Vivian said. Even when certain people couldn't, or wouldn't, step up. Elaine's fork clinked against her plate. There it was. Sloane turned to her mother, voice low. You're really going to let her say that? Again? Elaine kept her eyes forward. It's not worth it. Yes, it is, Sloane whispered. Because that wasn't just a dig. That was a rewrite. Vivian had already resumed her seat, accepting compliments, dabbing at her eyes like the speech had cost her something. Elaine finally turned to her daughter. Her eyes weren't angry, just worn, and quietly fed up. I'm tired, she said, but not of you, not of the truth. I'm just tired of pretending silence is grace. Sloane reached into her coat pocket and felt the weight of the flash drive. Small, cold, heavy. Then let's stop pretending. Elaine didn't ask what she meant. She didn't need to. Chapter 10, The Turn. Sloane stood slowly, not loud enough to interrupt, but deliberately enough to shift the air. Conversations paused, not because of volume, but because of tone. Because the one person who rarely spoke was now standing, eyes steady, hand resting lightly in her coat pocket. "I'd like to say something too," she said. Vivian's smile wavered for a breath, then returned. "Of course, sweetheart. By all means." Sloane looked around the table, not at Vivian, at the others. A lot's been said tonight about showing up, about stepping up, about who held this family together after Grandma passed. Her eyes moved to her mother, who still sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap. But some of us didn't need a spotlight to do the work. Some of us just did it, quietly, daily, while others told stories loud enough to drown out the truth. Vivian shifted slightly in her seat. Sloane. Sloane held up a hand, calm, not hostile. "No interruptions, please. You had your turn." Someone snorted quietly. Sloane reached into her coat and pulled out the flash drive. Black, nondescript, familiar to anyone who's worked in an office or a school or a life built on proof. "I brought something. It's short, but I think it belongs here. Since we're all talking about family and legacy." Vivian's face didn't move, but her shoulders did, just a fraction. Elaine inhaled sharply. "Sloane." Sloane met her mother's eyes. "You said to do it with intention," she said softly. Elaine didn't stop her. Sloane walked to the side table, where Vivian's husband had connected a laptop to the TV earlier for a family slideshow. A simple HDMI cord, a ready screen. She plugged in the drive and clicked the file. Then she turned and returned to her seat, slowly, deliberately, as Vivian's voice filled the room. "I know you think I'm being harsh, but you saw it. Elaine didn't have the spine to lead. So yeah, I twisted the story. So what? It worked. No one questions me." Silence. She did the heavy lifting, sure, but if people knew that, they'd sympathize with her. "And I've spent years building this legacy. I wasn't going to let her rewrite it with casseroles and good intentions." The audio ended. The silence didn't. Sloane didn't say a word. She didn't need to, because the turn had already happened, not in the voice recording, but in the room itself, in the faces that had turned to Vivian, in the expressions that once offered her grace, now offering only realization. Vivian opened her mouth. No one was listening. Chapter 11. The tape. No one moved. The last words of the recording, casseroles and good intentions, still hung in the air like static. Vivian blinked rapidly, smiled too widely. That clip is completely out of context." Uncle Dennis frowned. "What's the context where that sounds better?" Vivian laughed nervously, but her voice cracked. "It was a private conversation, with Harriet, not meant for. This is a breach of trust." "A breach?" Aunt Carol repeated. "Vivian, you admitted to changing the story." "It was just venting," Vivian snapped. "We all say things in frustration." Elaine hadn't moved. Her fork sat on her untouched pie. Her eyes were still locked on the screen. Black now. The audio ended, the silence louder than any accusation. Sloane spoke, calm and clear. "You called the version of the will you submitted a clarification, but it excluded my mother completely from ownership. And the handwriting didn't match. We have Grandma's notes. We have the post-it." "You what?" Vivian said, eyes flashing. "I have the original binder," Sloane said, "with Grandma's writing, and your email chain with the estate lawyer. You told him you'd speak for both of you because Elaine wouldn't push back." Vivian looked to the others, for support, for backup, for the power she used to command. But they weren't looking at her the same way anymore. Tyler, the cousin who once practically worshipped Vivian, shifted his chair away from her, arms crossed. "You let us think Aunt Elaine was bitter, for years. She didn't contest it," Vivian barked. "She didn't know she was supposed to," Sloane shot back. Harriet, red-faced, stood up from the table and quietly left the room. Vivian's breath hitched. Aunt Carol looked at Elaine. "Why didn't you say anything?" Elaine finally lifted her head. Her voice was steady. "Quiet. Because I thought if I stayed silent, it would keep the peace. I didn't realize silence was the story." She glanced across the table. "But it won't be anymore." Vivian stood suddenly, knocking her chair slightly off balance. "You think you're better than me?" she hissed. "You couldn't handle the weight. You were never meant to." "Enough," Sloane said. Her voice was ice. Vivian stopped, and the room, once ruled by Vivian's voice, belonged to someone else now. Chapter 12. The reaction. Vivian didn't sit back down. She hovered awkwardly at the head of the table, one hand gripping the back of her chair like it might anchor her to something solid. No one was making eye contact with her anymore. Uncle Dennis pushed his plate aside and cleared his throat. "I'd like to ask a very simple question," he said. "Did Mom leave you the house outright, or did you change that after she passed?" Vivian scoffed. "Of course she left it to me. I handled everything." "That's not what was on the first draft," Sloane said. "We have a scan of Grandma's handwritten list. She named both sisters as co-owners. She even left Elaine the cedar chest and her wedding china, none of which were ever delivered." "I was told they didn't exist anymore," Elaine said softly. Vivian turned, red-faced. "They were damaged, the movers." "They're in your attic," Sloane interrupted. "I found them 2 Thanksgivings ago when I went up there looking for extra chairs." A stunned silence fell. Aunt Carol looked between them. "Vivian, is that true?" Vivian opened her mouth, but no one was waiting for her answer anymore. One of the cousins, Melanie, leaned forward. "I just want to say, I always thought Aunt Elaine was the one who walked away, that she couldn't handle it. But now I think she was just pushed out and didn't fight back." Elaine looked up. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. "I didn't want to lose the rest of the family by fighting one person," she said. "But maybe that was a mistake." "No," Sloane said. "Your mistake was believing anyone would protect your place if you didn't claim it." The table shifted, the mood, no longer tense, but realigning. Vivian sat down, not gracefully, not with dignity, just small. And for the first time in years, Elaine stayed exactly where she was, at the table, with everyone else. Chapter 13, The Walkout. Vivian tried to reclaim control. She poured herself another glass of wine with theatrical calm, then turned toward the table with a small smile, the kind she'd mastered over the years. Smooth, apologetic, coated in practiced charm. "Well," she said, clearing her throat, "I think we've all gotten a little off track. These things happen in families. Misunderstandings, feelings. I never meant for anyone to feel pushed aside." The room said nothing. Aunt Carol tilted her head. "You didn't mean to erase your sister from the will?" Vivian blinked. "I didn't erase anyone. I followed what I thought was best." Uncle Dennis stood slowly, tossing his napkin onto his empty plate. "You thought it was best to take the house, the credit, and the sympathy, and let the rest of us think Elaine walked away." Vivian's eyes darted toward Elaine. She didn't exactly fight for it. Elaine finally stood, not defensive, not loud. Just done. "I was tired," she said quietly. "Tired of losing Mom, tired of keeping the peace, tired of hearing myself called a problem every time I asked a question." Vivian gave a sharp laugh. "You're so dramatic." "No," Elaine replied, her voice steady. "I'm just done being quiet." A long pause. Sloane stood as well, her coat already folded over her arm. "Come on, Mom. We're not finished here," Vivian said, taking a step forward. Sloane turned back. "You are." Vivian's face contorted. Not into tears, but indignation. Her voice dropped into a hiss. "You think this changes anything? I still have the house, the name, the history. You think a voice memo and a few scans erase me?" "No," Sloane said, "but it reveals you." And that was enough. Melanie, the cousin who had once idolized Vivian, stood next. "I'll walk you out, Aunt Elaine." 2 others followed, without a word. Vivian stared as one seat after another emptied. Not in a rush, not in protest, just in quiet, irreversible alignment. Elaine wrapped her scarf around her neck. "I didn't walk out of my mother's story. You pushed me out." Vivian opened her mouth. "Elaine." But Elaine didn't turn back. She walked to the door, and this time, the room didn't follow Vivian with their eyes. They watched Elaine, and they remembered. Chapter 14. The Reset. Elaine didn't speak in the car. She stared out the window, hands clasped in her lap, watching the trees blur into shadows as the road unspooled behind them. The silence wasn't brittle. It wasn't angry. It just was. Sloane didn't rush her. She simply drove. Back at home, Elaine moved on instinct, coat on the hook, shoes off in the foyer. She made her way into the kitchen, like a woman returning to herself. Each step a little steadier than the last. "I'll make tea," she murmured, more to the room than to anyone in it. Sloane leaned against the doorway and watched her mother move. Still precise, still quiet, but something was different. The fold in her shoulders was gone. The invisible weight she always carried when Vivian's name came up had lifted, or at least shifted. Elaine reached for the kettle, paused, then said, without turning around, "Was I awful?" "No," Sloane said. "You were honest." Elaine gave a soft hum of acknowledgement. "I didn't think I'd say anything. I really didn't." "You didn't have to." Sloane stepped into the kitchen. "You just had to let me." Elaine turned slowly. "But I've let her get away with it for so long. That doesn't mean you have to keep letting her." They stood there for a beat, not as mother and daughter, trying to protect each other, but as two women who had spent years letting someone else tell their story. The kettle clicked off. Elaine poured the water into 2 mugs and carried them to the table. She sat down and wrapped her hands around her cup like it was an anchor. "I spent so long thinking it would be selfish to stand up for myself," she said softly, "that it would make me petty, small." Sloane stirred her tea. "It made you invisible." Elaine looked at her, eyes glossy. "And you made me visible again." They drank in silence for a moment, not because they didn't have anything to say, but because, for once, there was nothing left they needed to say. Elaine set her mug down. "I don't think I'm going back next year." "You don't have to," Sloane said. "We'll host. Here." Elaine's brow lifted. "And who exactly is coming?" "Whoever still sees you the way you deserve to be seen." Elaine gave a small, startled laugh, the kind that breaks after holding your breath for too many years. "Well," she said, "I hope you're ready to cook." Sloane smiled. "As long as you make the cranberry compote." Elaine smiled back, and for the first time in years, it didn't look forced or practiced. It looked earned. Epilogue. The chair. Thanksgiving came again, but this time the address was different. It was Elaine's house. Same walls, same furniture, but it felt newly claimed. The dining room table had been extended with a folding leaf. Mismatched chairs tucked around its edges, and the good plates, not because of formality, but because this year felt earned. Elaine sat at the head, not by accident, not out of default, but because everyone had looked to her when they walked in, and she hadn't stepped aside. Sloane moved between the kitchen and dining room with calm efficiency, her apron dusted with flour, sleeves rolled up. She didn't need to coordinate anything. The family had adjusted to a new center of gravity, and it held. When Aunt Carol arrived, she hugged Elaine with both arms and whispered, "About time." Uncle Dennis brought a bottle of wine and asked where to carve. Melanie brought her own cranberry compote this year, setting it down with a sheepish grin. "Mine's not as good, but I figured I'd try." Elaine smiled. "It looks perfect." At dinner, the conversation flowed, real, unforced. People laughed easily. There were pauses, but not awkward ones. Just breath between stories. And Vivian? She wasn't there. There had been no formal exile, no dramatic blow-up, just a slow, irreversible unraveling. After the reveal, Vivian had posted a vague note about family betrayal and private matters being twisted for attention. Then she went quiet. No lawsuit, no contact. But silence doesn't mean immunity. Sloane had gone further than anyone expected. She filed a formal petition through probate court, backed by original documents, Grandma's handwritten notes, the scanned binder entries, the post-it, the metadata, the voice memo. The judge didn't even ask for a hearing. It was all there in black and white. Vivian didn't contest it. Maybe because she couldn't. Maybe because she knew what would come out if she did. The ruling was swift. The house had been wrongfully transferred based on altered intent. Elaine was entitled to her half, retroactively. Vivian was ordered to repay half of the home sale proceeds, including the equity growth, plus the appraised value of personal effects she had kept. The check arrived 3 weeks later. No note, no apology, but it cleared, and the record corrected, not just emotionally, legally. The cedar chest, the one Grandma had promised Elaine directly, appeared in her garage one morning, wrapped in a tarp. A week later, The missing wedding china arrived in 2 boxes, stacked neatly at her door. No signature, just left. Elaine never said a word about it. She didn't need to. Now, seated at the table, she passed the mashed potatoes and retold the story of Grandma's sugar-salted pie, the one she used to tell only when asked. Tonight, she shared it like it was hers to offer, because it was. Melanie raised her glass for a toast. To the ones who carried everything, she said, and the daughters who made sure the world finally saw it. The room echoed with soft clinks of glass. Elaine turned to Sloane. "You didn't have to do all this." Sloane smiled. "I know. But I couldn't unhear what I heard, and I couldn't unsee you being erased." Elaine nodded once, then looked around the room. Full, alive, anchored in something real. This was what she had nearly surrendered to keep the peace. And now it was hers.
Thanks so much for watching. If you love a good revenge story, or if you've ever dreamed of getting the last word without saying much at all, you're in the right place. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new savage ending. Because around here, karma always hits different.